Well, I know optimism is a moral and ethical choice you have to make, often on a daily basis.
Well, I think it's just natural to my character to be optimistic, but I also find that when I'm optimistic, stuff gets done, things get achieved, and that feeds on itself, and it just makes me more and more optimistic.
Well, probably similar to Tom, I just feel like optimism breeds optimism. We've sort of just got to keep thinking that way, and then it just sort of keeps going on.
Well, I'm optimistic when I see ideas and innovations that address climate change.
I'm an enthusiast, and to be an enthusiast, you must act enthusiastically like your good self, Victor. That's what makes me optimistic.
As a mother of 3 teenage children, my children fill me with happiness and hope, and that's what makes me optimistic about the world around us.
What makes me optimistic, Victor, are the people.
Well, I think actually the size of the challenge itself makes me somewhat optimistic.
Thanks, Victor. I think 3 factors: clean disruption and the power of exponential growth, the broad-based global response we're seeing. It's not just individuals, communities, governments at all levels, it's cities, it's towns. And the third one is the idea of tipping points. I think this is an idea that we usually associate with Earth systems, but it's also something for the financial system and social systems. And I think we're pushing on those right now.
Victor, thank you. In the context of the climate crisis we're facing at the moment, there are 2 things. It's the potential for the European Green Deal, which is a massive policy that's coming into play and may well influence the world in terms of reducing emissions. And then, look, let's hope for a Biden win so we get the new Green Deal from the USA.
Victor Perton here for the Centre for Optimism, and it's a huge welcome to yet another one of our events with ideaSpies. As you know, we're all about optimism and asking people what makes you optimistic. ideaSpies is all about innovation and the spreading of ideas and optimism, and it's a match made in heaven. And today you will really enjoy this fantastic, fast-moving panel of some of the brightest people in Australia. So with no further ado, as I said, it's compulsory to answer the question, what makes you optimistic in these events? And our experienced chair of ideaSpies, Lynn Wood, welcome, and what makes you optimistic?
Well, I'm optimistic when I see ideas and innovations that address climate change. And that's why we create a new category of ideas for climate on ideaSpies, all expressed simply in 100 words or less, and appointed editors here for ideaSpies who will be speaking today. And we've arranged this conversation with the Centre for Optimism, our great partners. And this is because we want more people to know about these ideas and share them. So we really do make a difference, and we can all have confidence in the future.
Well, you inspire me on an almost daily basis, Lynn, with those wonderful ideas that you're spreading. So it's fantastic. And one of Lynn's partners in crime and a leader on the advisory board, and who I'll be throwing to later, Maddie Cunningham. What makes you optimistic?
Hi there. As a mother of 3 teenage children, my children fill me with happiness and hope, and that's what makes me optimistic about the world around us. Their uproarious laughter.
For so many people, you know, to see optimism through the eyes of a child, it's astonishingly uplifting. Jeremy Wright, you are just always active in the climate space and Rotary. What makes you optimistic?
Victor, thank you. In the context of the climate crisis we're facing at the moment, there are 2 things. It's the potential for the European Green Deal, which is a massive policy that's coming into play and may well influence the world in terms of reducing emissions. And then, look, let's hope for a Biden win so we get the new Green Deal from the USA. Those two policy changes, I think, spell considerable hope for the world and to help solve this climate issue.
Hope and optimism. Now, Angus Robinson, you are always working on reinventing and reinventing Australia and reinventing travel and always this wonderful creative mind. What makes you optimistic?
Well, folks, I'm an enthusiast, and to be an enthusiast, you must act enthusiastically like your good self, Victor. That's what makes me optimistic.
Now, the panellists are my good friend, Will Blomfield. As I said to the other panelists, when I look at my telephone book for Will, I've got telephone numbers for all sorts of astonishing countries. He becomes a leader in whatever community he's living in. Will Blomfield, what makes you optimistic?
Thanks, Victor. I think three factors: clean disruption and the power of exponential growth. The broad-based global response we're seeing, it's not just individuals, communities, governments at all levels, it's cities, it's towns. And the third one is the idea of tipping points. I think this is an idea that we usually associate with Earth systems, but it's also something for the financial system and social systems. And I think we're pushing on those right now.
Fantastic. Tom Dennis, you're doing amazing things with wave energy. Tell us what makes you optimistic.
Well, I think it's just natural to my character to be optimistic, but I also find that when I'm optimistic, stuff gets done, things get achieved, and that feeds on itself, and it just makes me more and more optimistic. So on top of all of that, of course, there is the external factors, and I'm just optimistic seeing the way that climate change is becoming an ever increasing, well, it's moving to the forefront of people's mind at an ever increasing rate. So I think the point about the tipping point is important. I think we're at a stage now where it's not going to go backwards.
Brilliant. No, you and Will as one on that. Now, Rebecca Huntley, I have loved her books and the optimism contained in her books, and I am a huge fan. Rebecca Huntley, you've answered that question many times in your books, but for us today, tell us what makes you optimistic.
I think, well, I know optimism is a moral and ethical choice you have to make, often on a daily basis. And I really love the James Baldwin quote, a great writer and civil rights activist. And he said, I can't be a pessimist because I'm alive. So I'm forced to be an optimist. I must believe we can survive whatever we must survive. And he wrote about that years and years before climate change, but it's something that stays in my mind as a kind of a true expression of why I'm optimistic.
And I love that. It's a moral and ethical choice. Daniel Mason de Croz, you're doing fantastic work at CSIRO, expanding knowledge and spreading knowledge. What makes you optimistic?
Well, I think actually the size of the challenge itself makes me somewhat optimistic, because it's such a systematic problem that you start seeing so many different people starting to engage in different areas. And the more sort of people coming up with new ideas and thinking out of the box and coming up with different ways of approaching the problem, I think gives me a lot of hope that, you know, a combination of all of these actors are going to help us find ways to improve the climate situation.
Fantastic. Grant McDowell doing amazing things in the energy space and creating new communities. What makes you optimistic?
What makes me optimistic, Victor, are the people that I get to meet within the Spark Club community and more broadly in energy tech. They're inspiring. They're bringing in innovation that I think has the potential to realize significant change in the energy transition. And as Will said earlier, we're at a point where price of, certainly with wind and solar here in Australia and in most other countries, is cheaper than the grid. And what that does is unlock enormous amount of value to lower electricity costs and do this through clean energy generation. So I'm very, very optimistic about the future.
And brilliant. And we can see behind you the yellow brick road on the way to a new energy future. Now, Vanessa Rauland is, again, an author. She runs ClimateClever, and all of her profile says that she is an optimist of the highest order. So, Vanessa, can you tell this audience what makes you optimistic?
Well, probably similar to Tom, I just feel like optimism breeds optimism. We've sort of just got to keep thinking that way, and then it sort of keeps going on. But particularly, there's two things that make me optimistic. One is that my PhD, which was around decarbonising cities, really revealed how much of climate change is going to be addressed at the local level. And I take a lot of heart seeing so many local governments declaring a climate emergency. They can just get on with the job. There's a lot more barriers at the national or global level or even the state level, but local governments just get on and implement stuff. We're seeing a lot of individuals and communities really rising up, grassroots communities, even kids demanding action, but also now really starting to take action themselves. And I think the Fight for Planet A on ABC has really helped to catalyse that movement as well, which is fantastic. And my other point would just be that a lot of people mention this as well, is that we already have so many of the technologies that we need to address climate change and to create a low carbon future. It's just the political will that we've been lacking. And I think with all of this groundswell of people, individuals wanting action, I think that we'll start to see that change, that political will.
Brilliant. And as you say, with local government, over the weekend, Harvard released some new research that said that optimism lowers the risk of hypertension. But what was the particular finding of the research group was that optimism is a public health issue. And I put out a press release yesterday praising the city of Bendigo, which for a month has been running the Voices of Optimism and spreading the word and getting the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition and everyone to express their optimism. So I think you're right, local government is key. But that's enough from me. I'd like to now hand over.
So Angus Robinson and Jeremy Wright are co-editors for climate at ideaSpies, and both are passionate about finding and supporting ways to address it. Angus, a geologist by profession, has enjoyed broad experience in the mining, manufacturing, and technology development and tourism industries. In the late 1990s, Angus directed the major industrial energy efficiency project for the Warren Centre for Advanced Engineering at the University of Sydney. And shortly thereafter, as CEO of the Australian Electrical and Electronic Manufacturers Association, he championed, way ahead of his time, cleaner, greener, smarter manufacturing. Angus also served as the inaugural General Manager of the Australian Technology Park. Now, Jeremy has been writing about the environment since his university days as a student engineer. He's had several careers in engineering, and the performing arts and medical research. But he's always retained his interest and advocacy for a sustainable world. In 2015, he helped establish an environmental action group for Rotary International, and he now chairs a climate and peace forum for his local Rotary district. Now, as well as climate innovation, Angus and Jeremy both have an interest in Rotary and beekeeping. Thanks, and over to you, Angus.
Thank you, Lynn. Well, colleagues, I'd like to make a series of points by way of an introduction to today's discussion. Firstly, the scientific evidence for global warming, both atmospheric and oceanic, is overwhelming and indisputable. It seems to me that the key is how humanity working in unison can limit the predicted global temperature increases to less than 2 degrees by 2050. Scientists now tell us that not only do we need to severely limit the extent of increasing atmospheric pollution through CO2 and the more deadly methane emissions, we need to work out how we can actually remove CO2 from the atmosphere. Of course, we can individually select energy sources such as renewables, driven by rapidly evolving advanced materials and other technologies. These minimize atmospheric pollution, and we can also systematically work to reduce our environmental footprint by reducing energy usage through the application of energy efficiency measures. ideaSpies has documented a range of great ideas and innovations that address these key imperatives. I'd like to highlight one of these somewhat controversial concepts that has not been well explained in Australia to date, although the Prime Minister made brief reference to it in his media interview on Sunday. That is the category of negative emission technologies, two of which are, firstly, planting forests, changing forest management to retain more carbon, and adjusting agricultural practices to enhance soil carbon storage. This was also featured by a panellist in our recent Greening Australia webinar held earlier this month. And secondly, practices that increase the amount of carbon stored in living plants or sediments in tidal marshlands, seagrass beds, and other tidal or saltwater wetlands. Nevertheless, to survive the impact of human-induced climate change, we must work with and not against nature. We need to shift nature-positive models through overhauling three core socio-economic systems: how we manage food, land and ocean systems, how infrastructure and built environment, and how we produce energy and extract resources, by embarking on 15 crucial, what is called nature-positive transitions, as recently formulated by a World Economic Forum report. We can all play a role to achieve this noble goal. This is the reason for us to have hope, if not a modicum of optimism. So Lynn, would you like me to start the conversation by asking a question of Jeremy?
Yes, please.
As Lynn mentioned, both Jeremy and I are connected with Rotary over many years, and Rotary is an organisation of 1.4 million Rotarians around the world, of which some 43,000 live in Australia. And Jeremy, given that Rotarians, whilst having a strong community and international interest in the work they've achieved over many years, have not necessarily taken to get interested in issues relating to the environment. How, from the work you've been doing recently through this group set up in Sydney, how do you see Rotarians now reacting to this challenge that I've introduced?
Angus, thank you. Look, it's an easy answer. There's great potential for Rotarians around the world to respond favourably because they're committed to community service, service above self. And we had a Rotarian president back in 1990 who established a program entitled Preserve the Planet. I think since then there's been a number of Rotarians who have been very keen to support the concept. But look, back to Vanessa's point about a political will. Rotarians in America are known to be conservative. They're known to be connected with the Republican Party, for instance. So if there is a peer pressure, although Rebecca will probably tell me that can't be pressure, it's got to be encouragement. If there's a peer encouragement for those, wherever they might be, conservative or otherwise around the world, from a body like Rotarians, we might be able to change that political will and have the solutions come through the technology that I think the panellists are going to address today. So there's a brief answer, Angus. It's good to have you on board.
Good, thank you. Over to you now, Matt.
Okay, so I'd now like to introduce the guest panelists, but if everyone could just be mindful, each speaker will have 5 minutes. That'll include the time to speak and for a question to be asked and answered. I would now like to introduce Dr. Tom Dennis. He's the Executive Chairman of Swell Energy, and our energy editor, Kylie Hargraves, unfortunately couldn't be with us today, but gave us this wonderful introduction of Tom. Tom, what we'd love to hear from you today is an overview of the Swell energy technology and its potential impact on climate change. Welcome aboard.
Okay, great. Thanks, Madeline. Well, the technology is one that converts the energy in ocean waves into electricity. So it's part of that group that solar and wind and tidal, I guess, belong to. And it's not as advanced, of course, as wind and solar. They're a couple of decades at least ahead, but we believe that wave energy, with its really a concentrated form of solar energy. The sun heats the earth unevenly because the earth's rotating. That creates winds that blow, and the winds impart their energy partially to the waves on over the oceans. And because water's denser, it means it's a more concentrated form of renewable energy. And if you can extract it, well, it can be more reliable and consistent, and certainly more predictable. You can predict waves several days out with very great accuracy these days. So we believe that it has the potential to play its part in climate change. It's not just a climate change mitigation measure, as any renewable energy source is, in the sense that it mitigates the effects of climate change by reducing emissions. But the technology can also be used because of it's the structure, the nature of the structure of the devices. Placed side by side, they can not only generate electricity, renewable green electricity, but also they can protect the coastline from erosion. And in some places that's very important. So therefore it's also a climate change adaptation measure, in that it can help to protect from the consequences of climate change that will be inevitable. I mean, as much as we're trying to minimize the effects, there will be some in terms of increased extreme weather events and sea level rise, and that can have a drastic impact on various parts of the world. So yeah, the technology, both a climate change mitigation and adaptation measure. As far as I know, it's the only technology that can make that claim, but it's something that we expect to be able to demonstrate very successfully in the upcoming months. Our King Island project that we're developing and is almost complete in Tasmania, that will be operating early next year, and we expect to, as I say, demonstrate the efficacy of the technology, and therefore move on to the next stage after that with more and more projects happening in various places.
Tom, I was just wondering, the word hybrid has been thrown around in the renewable sector for some time now, but it's very interesting to note that people are now talking about offshore wind farms, floating solar panels, and the possibility of linking that to tidal energy. Any comment on that as being an entry point for the area in which you're working?
I don't think it'll be an entry point, because to connect with, say, offshore wind turbines, we've had some discussions with various developers in that regard, and they want to see a very robust, successful, efficient wave energy technology before going to the trouble and the cost of designing a new structure that can then therefore be incorporated into these other as a hybrid. That said, I absolutely agree that ultimately hybrid versions will be a very logical way of minimizing costs for both offshore wind turbines and wave energy devices. So yes, it will happen, but I think we need to be very successful and clear in our what the technology can achieve independently of wind turbines to begin with.
Indeed. Maddie, had we time for another question?
Yes, you do.
When politicians talk about being technology agnostic, have they reached the understanding, do you think, that this means taking on board such as wave energy and geothermal? Have we reached that stage of recognition?
I think so. Our King Island project is funded, almost half of it the cost is funded by ARENA. So whether that, you can argue that it's the politicians themselves who've come to that conclusion, or clearly the powers that be at ARENA have. So I think that's a very positive thing. They see wave energy as potentially a great addition to the renewable energy mix. So yeah, we're quietly confident, and or should I say optimistic, that we'll get there.
Thank you. Maddie.
Thanks so much, Tom. I'd now like Dr. Vanessa Rauland, who is the founder and CEO of ClimateClever, to join us. I had the pleasure of meeting Vanessa some 2 years ago as a judge at Tech 23. Vanessa, you've had an absolutely stellar year. You've launched your home app and business app just recently. We'd love to hear about how you've been going with the ClimateClever app throughout the communities, and hear about all the environmental innovations that are going on to strengthen the communities.
Thanks so much, Maddie. Yeah, no, it has been a huge 6 months for us, which I feel very grateful for, because I know COVID's been obviously very tough on a lot of businesses, but we have a lot to be optimistic about. Just for those who don't know what we do, ClimateClever is a sort of a green tech or a clean tech startup. We've developed an app. It's based from sort of 10 years of my research while I've been an academic at Perton University over here in Western Australia. And the app so it was initially designed for schools, and we helped the school to measure their carbon footprint, audit their buildings to understand what's consuming resources, and then choose from a growing list of actions that they can put in place in their school to reduce. So it's taking the user on that whole journey from measurement through to implementation and seeing the impact of those actions. And yeah, as Maddie said, we were very excited to launch our homes app. We launched that in March, just as COVID hit. We did try to fast track it, so that we obviously realized a lot of people are stuck in their houses, their utility bills are rising, as is their carbon footprint, to really help empower them to take control of that and help to reduce their carbon footprint. We also launched a local government partnership program around that time. And as I mentioned at the beginning, with so many councils across Australia really starting to take the climate challenge seriously and declaring a climate emergency, it's been a great time for local governments to, they're actually looking for actions that can help their community to reduce their carbon footprint. So we've partnered with 12 councils across Australia now, which is super exciting. When we partner with a council, it discounts the app for the community. But what we do is we collect all the data and de-identify and aggregate it, and we can provide it back to the council to say, you've got this many users using the app, their carbon footprint is X, they've reduced by Y, they've saved this many tons of carbon emissions, they've implemented X number of actions, and this has been a wonderful opportunity for local governments who find it notoriously hard to measure the impact of their sustainability or their climate initiatives within the community. So a lot of them have always targeted their own operations, but this is sort of the first time they can really start to measure their community. So that's been really exciting. And yeah, we're about to launch our business version. So that will be the sort of the full suite of our apps. It will be schools, homes and businesses, which really helps to target the whole sort of community level. And yeah, we've already got a bunch of businesses. We've had over 70 businesses register interest for that. And we're starting to work with them now. We're also finding that the businesses are buying the home app subscriptions for their staff, again, to sort of acknowledge that a lot of staff are working from home and doing it tough at home. And then, yeah, we were on Fight for Planet A on ABC's TV series in August, so last month, and that's been huge for us as well. It's certainly grown our users. We've seen a really massive growth in individuals just wanting, finally realizing that they can actually take action themselves. So that's super exciting. And in terms of our schools, we grew from 30 schools nationally in March to 80 schools now, and we've got schools in every state and territory. So it's it's been a very, very big year for us, and we're very excited just to see this momentum building at that community level.
Thanks, Vanessa. You've already mentioned that you appeared on the ABC series. For those of you that haven't seen it, could you just tell us a little bit more about that Fight for Planet A?
Yeah, so the TV series, it's a 3-part series, and it really documents, it focuses actually on households. So I think they've got 4 or 5 households where they're following their journey and looking at all the different sources of emissions, so food, energy, transport, lots of different areas, and helping them understand the impact of that and putting actions in place. But we featured purely around our schools program, and so we had Oatlands Public School in Sydney, who was filmed in episode 2. It showed them, utilising our app and started to put actions in place around the school. And then in episode 3, they show the results of that. And spoiler alert, they actually managed to reduce their utility bills and their carbon footprint by 30% in just 4 months. So that's a huge achievement, and that was with 0 cost outlay. So that wasn't retrofitting lights or upgrading anything. That was purely behaviour change initiatives and switching things off and just being more aware. And I think that's a really big lesson. And what we try and say at the home level as well is there's so much you can do for no cost. It's just about being a bit more sensible with resources and not wasteful. Of course, when you upgrade to newer technologies, that helps to save as well. But there's certainly a lot we can all do regardless.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Maddie, could I just mention that a few people are putting up questions on Q&A, so the panelists might like to answer them if they haven't been answered in their talks. Yeah.
Sure. I think if we could leave the questions. I think Victor and I will pull some of the questions when we get to the Q&A, if that's okay, Lynn.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, William Blomfield is the Assistant Director of Climate Innovation and Investment, working for DFAT. Welcome aboard, William.
Thank you very much, Madeline, and thank you all. So we sit within the team, the Climate Change and Sustainability branch within the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and broadly we manage the international negotiations in the, for example, in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which led to the Paris Agreement. And our other forums, we talk about the climate finance commitments that Australia is making and help in the implementation of those. And we're in the process of integrating climate change considerations into our development assistance program through the Climate Change Action Strategy. Our area, the climate innovation and investments area, is more focused on the economic side of the story, so the trade and investment. And I think more broadly, we'd sort of summarize in saying seizing the opportunities for Australia as the world lowers its emissions. We also look at international partnerships. So you might have seen recently Australia and Germany signed a deal on global supply chains for green hydrogen. We've also had similar agreements with Japan and Korea and Singapore in recent months. So we work with other key agencies to deliver those. I think my message today would be, I think as diplomats, we've talked a lot today about Rotary, how they connect people, and I think diplomats can play a really important role in catalysing and facilitating connections globally. And my encouragement would be for people to get in touch with local DFAT offices if you have any sort of global collaboration. I noticed there was one Q&A question about someone who's got experience in Africa and the Pacific. I think our network of posts, they can add value with working with our partners such as Austrade and Export Finance Australia. And I just wanted to give a couple of really some brief examples from my experience overseas. My first posting was in South Africa, and we covered Botswana from there, and we set up earlier in 2008, 2009, some fire management cooperation between Australia and Botswana. Now, over the years, this has led to the International Savannah Fire Management Initiative, which piloted Indigenous knowledge and technologies in fire management. And they took those over to Botswana and helping them reduce the incidence of wildfires and reduce emissions. And now that has been very successful over the last several years, and now they're looking at upscaling that across other countries. So this is an example of, I guess, that sort of those ideas that germinate and we can share across the globe. Another example, just to reiterate the point about using our network, I spent some time in Australia's embassy in Colombia last year, and my first job was to go to Cartagena. and present a Australian renewable energy expert and a renewable energy company who are looking at microgrids in Colombia to help and to seize the opportunities there, and supported by the Austrade team there that set up this fantastic program, and there was a well-attended conference. So I think there's a lot of opportunities out there for Australia. People talk about Australia as a superpower or whatever powerhouse, and I think the Australian network, the DFAT network, can make a big difference and help in those. And there's the last example. I spent a bit of time in Trinidad and Tobago, helping out at the High Commission there, and a small country called Suriname in northern South America, with which we have a very, very modest relationship. And this is I think the last point I'll make is this idea of multi-solving or co-benefits. And one small project we have through a direct aid program, a small grants program, we supported this NGO to train female entrepreneurs in Suriname to develop beekeeping. And what they did it in along the coast of Suriname, which is very, very vulnerable to sea level rise, and helped them. The bees did their thing, and the mangroves grew really quickly. And that was a really successful program several years ago. Now we're helping through another small grant, it's talking $30,000 to train up people along the whole Suriname coastline. So these sort of ideas of, building up the mangroves, the nature-based solutions, they help reduce emissions. They also build resilience. And, there's all the win-win-wins. The local farmers can have their land without salination. There's less flooding, and I think those are sort of opportunities. The global sharing of global best practice. There's a lot of Australian innovations that we can share, and equally we can access those. So happy to play that role as a bridge. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, William. Jeremy, I understand you have a question for Will.
Yes, Will. Given the potential of these green deals coming out of Europe and America, having trade tariffs that depend on countries' policies to do with emissions, can we look forward to a change in Australia's stance on their emissions when these green deals impact our trade?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I mean, the European Union has put forward a proposal for a border carbon adjustment mechanism, and obviously under the Biden, if there were a Biden administration, they flagged a similar initiative. I think as we speak, I think the Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction is outlining the technology, the first low emissions technology statement. So I encourage you to listen into that. I think I've been fortunate enough to work on both the hydrogen strategy and this piece of work, and it's certainly, I think it's, I'll let the minister speak for himself, but I think it's an evolution, as you would say.
Will.
Thank you, Will. Daniel is our senior research scientist for CSIRO. Welcome aboard, Daniel.
Thanks for having me.
Great, Daniel. So we have on the ideaSpies platform so many wonderful ideas and innovations on CSIRO, and we will be showing those with you all shortly. If you could tell us, Daniel, a bit more about what you are doing with your work, and tell us a bit about climate and sustainability.
Sure. Well, I mean, maybe to start off, for the audience may not be as familiar with CSIRO, it's Australia's national research agency, and it has scientists across the country working with the private sector and with other global and national communities to spur innovation, to solve challenges like climate change. The kind of work that I do is looking at the systematic nature of climate change and how human activities affect the environment, food security, and economic and social outcomes. And I think one of the things I really like that William pointed out was these issues around co-benefits, which is something that we really are looking for in terms of how do we leverage solutions that give us positive outcomes across multiple dimensions. And so, things like where we can look for health outcomes that can help both climate change and the environment, and that can also have economic benefits. And CSIRO works across sort of all the spheres of economic activity. And so in that space, we do things such as working on improving the way we produce things we do, so we can reduce resource use. So there's a whole lot of work on genetic technologies that improve the efficiency of our agricultural production, for example. Improving wheat and cotton varieties allow us to use less water, less land. There are other technologies that we're looking at that look to improve healthy diets. We know that healthier diets are ones that tend to be less resource intensive. And so if we can start eating healthier, not only will we be healthier, we'll also be easing pressures on the environment and reducing climate change. We're looking at ways of decarbonizing how we produce. And so one of the cool technologies that's on the ideas is these ideas of feed additives. I think it was Jeremy who mentioned methane as a major climate change gas. And currently, livestock globally is a major producer of methane emissions. And these livestock feed additives are a really cool innovation that could help reduce the amount of methane that comes out from current livestock production.
Thank you, Daniel. As you can all see, we have a number of ideas by CSIRO across our major category areas, of which we have 12. I'm going to hand over to Lynn because I know Lynn would like to speak with Daniel about a number of the ideas that are showcased here today.
Thanks, Daniel. And it's a great privilege to have so many ideas on ideaSpies from the CSIRO, and also to have David Sodhi on our advisory board. And so thanks for joining us today, Daniel. The idea I wanted to ask you about is the one at the top of the screen with the cow eating the hay. And it's about the seaweed in feed idea, because it's a game changer for our environment and a great example of collaboration between industry and researchers. I know the commercial volumes will actually be available mid-2021. Is there anything that we can do to support this innovation?
In what way do you mean? Or I'm
just wondering, we're here, obviously connected to climate and starting to influence decisions, to influence what happens in the future. Is there anything more that you want to say about this innovation, and is there any way we can help?
Well, I mean, I think, I don't specifically work on this particular technology, so I can't answer those kind of unique details, but I think one of the things in general with these kinds of technologies that are important is sort of being open to experimentation and not rejecting something just because it's novel, and also recognizing that these kinds of technologies can both be an environmental gain and an economic benefit. A lot of these technologies, like these feed additives, not only reduce emissions, but they can also boost productivity. And so that has those sort of those co-benefits, those win-wins that we're talking about. In terms of the specifics behind sort of promoting this more, I guess increasing the awareness that these technologies are in the pipeline and having people aware and maybe looking for livestock that are using these could be a way of increasing sort of the demand pull.
And Jeremy, you might want to say something about that because you actually have a cattle property.
Look, we're keen as mustard to start using this feed as soon as possible. But I think the most advantageous application is going to be where cattle are fed a combination of foods that can be included, and the seaweed can be included. I think it's urgently needed, and to get the production scale up to scratch is the next step, clearly.
Thanks, Daniel, Lynn, and Jeremy. I'd now like to introduce Grant McDowell, co-founder and head of commercialisation and strategy for Enosi Australia, as well as the founder for Spark Club. Welcome, Grant. You are walking and talking with the most advanced smart energy suppliers in Australia. Can you tell us a bit more about how fast are the economics of renewable operations and applications overtaking fossil-based applications and installation? Thank you.
Sure. Hi. So, look, I think the overarching message is that we've really hit a tipping point, as we said earlier, around the cost of renewables. Both wind and solar are cheaper than regular grid energy, and the challenge really is how to get more people to get access to those cheaper prices. And with that demand, then we can get scale we need in terms of opening up every electricity account to wind and solar. So at Enosi, what we've done is developed a platform that enables us to see what energy is coming out onto the grid from the generation sources, and then what's being consumed in that same half-hour interval. And we call that traceability. And our platform that's monitoring those trades is called Power Tracer. The key really is to unlock, and I suppose some of the examples I would give is for lots of us now working at home and on Zoom calls all day, businesses can offer their employees wind and solar at a lower cost than conventional grid energy. So people can sign up, they can change retailers, and what we have some of our partners wanting to do is to pay that bill from the wind and solar, just the energy portion of it, for the employee, which we think in our modelling comes to around $300 a year. So the employee gets a cost reduction of around $300 on their electricity bill. The average electricity bill in the Eastern Seaboard is around $2,000. So there's a benefit there. And the business gets the reduction in terms of their carbon footprint, and I think certainly gets the benefit of bringing cleaner, cheaper renewable energy to the employee. So I think the other thing that I was going to share is this tipping point is around what I call the big levers. So there are a number of examples that we're now on the brink of bringing into the energy world in this transition. And I, through Spark Club, have just recently interviewed 7 businesses on their innovations that they're bringing to market, with this idea that Australia is the best market to develop energy tech in the world, or one of the best markets. Somebody described it recently as the Disneyland of distributed energy. Because we have a huge abundance of wind and solar, as you know. We also have some of the highest electricity prices in the world, which means that there's a pain point that we're addressing. We also have some of the best universities and the best reputation in terms of our tertiary education and innovation specifically around solar and other technology. And we have, in my view, a broken policy. And what that does is create a vacuum and a space for us to bring and introduce the solutions. So I'll just give a couple of quick examples. Open Solar, for example, have a design tool that they've developed, which is a software design tool for solar installers to go online and design a solar installation using the software. And the objective there is to have solar installers here in Australia adopt this technology or use this technology in their sales pipeline and then sell more successfully. But then more importantly, to take that out to the global solar installer network and allow people across the world. I think they have over 100 countries now using Open Solar. And the key to unlocking this value, which is their grand objective, is on the numbers that Open Solar have run, their industry at large needs to expand by 30% a year. It needs to grow 30% a year in order for us to make a meaningful change away from fossil fuels. And so they provide Open Solar free. So installers don't have to have that outgoing amount they've got to pay every month for the software. They can simply go online and use that design tool. A big lever with a grand objective. Another one I'll share is MGA Thermal. They're based up in Newcastle, and some of that technology that's come out of Newcastle Uni is now being used in a commercial application to store energy in a big battery, which is a material of heating and cooling. Am I over time?
Sounds like someone's got the timer. Actually, with that sound, I know Jeremy did have a question for you, Grant. So,
oh, look, it's probably segue for what you're talking about, Grant, which is terrific. And that is, how optimistic are you that the current technologies and the pace of innovation is going to mitigate against the impacts of climate change?
I think I'm extremely optimistic, because what I'm seeing is first of all, as I said earlier, the people out there, the innovators that are leading this change and coming up with incredible ideas, and also deploying at scale. The megawatts are now gigawatts of solar and wind around. So from a simple installation on the roof to big megawatt scale solar here in Australia and globally, it's very, hugely encouraging, because I think that's going to be fossil fuels, and that's the fastest way to get there. Offshore wind is another example. So I think it's a combination of existing technology and the innovation curve that we're on that I think is going to deliver the outcome we want, which is the transition away from fossil fuel.
thank you, Grant. Thank you so much. And welcome, Rebecca Huntley, our last guest panellist for today. It's fitting that we close with you. Tell us about your recent work and why it's time to get emotional on climate change.
Yeah, I will in a minute. I just wanted to reflect, having listened to all the terrific work that all the panellists are doing, and I want to share the fact that when I do focus groups with Australians of all kinds, particularly most of my work is really on people who are concerned about climate change, but for example, not actively factoring it into their voting decisions, been thinking about solar panels and all the rest of it. So basically the people we need to persuade to act as consumers and citizens on climate change quickly. One of the things I constantly marvel at is that when you give them very practical examples of what's being done in the renewable energy sector and what can be done around the world, they are immediately enthusiastic. They want to believe it. And they don't get particularly hung up on the science of solar panels or wind energy or any of those other kinds of things. They feel no need to kind of cherry pick, oh, how does that really work? Is that going to work? It's because they want to believe it, because support for renewable energy remains high. Of course, when you present them with the sometimes terrifying facts of climate change, they often resist that, push it away, say, oh, that might not be true, what about other things? So I think that that's a really good example of how we need to communicate about climate change, not just to kind of present, unalloyed, Pollyanna-ish type optimism, but continuously show that Australians are capable, as Grant McDowell said, of creating a kind of Disneyland of renewable energy that will create jobs, that will make energy cheaper and cleaner, that will clean up our air, that will help ensure that our soils are rich to grow the food that we want to continue to export to the area. People want that vision of Australia, they want to believe in it, and when presented with examples that can be scaled up, they really embrace that. Our challenge is to take all of that and to ensure that governments of all kinds around Australia support those initiatives, so that people don't necessarily need to be presented with these case studies that they never really knew about, but those case studies live around them constantly and they see them everywhere at work in all of their communities. And so I think that today I've been provided with just a fantastic, some examples I already knew of and more examples that I didn't, which means that I think, the case to shift public opinion even more, and more importantly, not so much public opinion, but public action on climate change is there to be made. In fact, it's almost irresistible. It's almost hard to resist, although we've got lots of people continuing to resist it. And just to address it's been wonderful to listen to the panellists and hear about their work. So for me, I suppose, as a social researcher rather than either a natural scientist or a kind of somebody selling an innovative tech project or somebody running a company, I've spent a lot of time understanding how Australians feel about the world around them and understanding how they feel about a complex, politicised and really quite confronting issue like climate change. And I realised that one of our greatest challenge is not necessarily to persuade people that climate change is real, but persuade people and show people that, that the solutions are in our grasp and that they need to continuously find ways to send messages to the political class and to businesses of all kinds that they need to embrace this sooner rather than later. So I've been in the kind of measurement of public opinion for a long time, which I still do a bit of, but now I'm in the role of public persuasion, which is much more about understanding people's emotional response to climate change and energy transition, and I'm enjoying it greatly.
Thank you so much, Rebecca.
There was deep and rich Q&A and commentary in the Zoom fields, and what was great on this occasion was that our panellists answered many of the questions by text during the course of the event. But here are some of the highlights of the concluding conversation.
We're now going to jump to the Q&A. We've got 5 minutes left. For those of you who are able to stay on afterwards, we will have the line open for another 20 or 30 minutes or so. So I'll hand over to Victor to do the Q&A. Thanks, Victor.
Oh, thanks, Maddie. Look, we've actually answered all the questions. The panellists have been fantastic at typing answers and the like. So we've got a few minutes left, and I noticed, for instance, some commentary, for instance, from each of the panellists about each other. So Vanessa, I saw a fantastic reaction of you to Grant's comments and the like. So do you want to elaborate and where you see these sorts of things going?
Oh, I was just excited to hear about the idea that, businesses supporting, support. I hadn't heard of that sort of idea of, businesses supporting a household and, in that transition to renewable energy. I live in WA where it's non-contestable, so I'm bitterly disappointed that I can't go off and choose a renewable energy supplier. I just have to tick the green box with Synergy. I think, there's just, there are so many exciting new innovations that we can choose from when you're aware of them. It's just a really optimistic and hopeful future when you can. So we just need to encourage more people to be discovering these innovations. So thank you, Victor and the team for creating these opportunities to discuss these ideas.
Oh, it's fantastic. I'm inspired. Will, there are a few questions about, people have got great ideas, and, there are thousands of great experts in Australia on many of these issues. One of the questions was, how do they become a part of the DFAT ecosystem and delivering these programs? I know you advertise some things, but what's the best way?
I think the best way is just starting a dialogue, reaching out to I'm happy to take any sort of queries and starting the dialogue and connecting you with the right person that takes forward the particular program that you might be interested in. So you could be interested in microgrids. We're talking to different countries about these different opportunities across the whole spectrum. So I think it's just really reaching out, whether when you're visiting, obviously can't do it now, but if you're visiting overseas and you're an Australian business trying to get into a certain market, reach out to the embassy and just start that conversation, because often I think the value of DFAT is really those facilitating those connections. Sometimes you might know someone that or some institution that's working on the particular and can open doors. So I think that's really great value.
Well, that's the example, isn't it? Familiarity. You've got to get to know people before they can really respond to your ideas. And Rebecca, I think you had something to say on that.
No, just following on from Will, and he would know this better as somebody who's seen climate action in action around the world, is one of the perhaps mistaken views about from the Australian community is that that renewable energy isn't being used in developing countries, and that developing countries need fossil fuels. But actually what's really quite clear is that there are plenty of countries poorer than us, with less of a tertiary education sector, with less opportunity, that are actually doing better than us. And whether that's microgrids on the subcontinent, whether that's a place like Costa Rica. And I've often thought that if Australians kind of knew that that was happening, some of their patriotism would be pricked. If Costa Rica was beating us in the Olympic pool time and time and time again, we would ask some pretty serious questions of the Institute of Sport. We should be asking why countries with less, natural resources or natural capacity around renewable energy, a country that was an innovator around solar panels at the beginning, and as I think, I can't remember who said, like quite high electricity prices, isn't doing better than countries with a lot less opportunity and a lot less money. So we do need to question this kind of whole idea that we can lag behind because developing nations are, and actually a lot of developing nations are doing better.
What we might do is we've reached the 1 hour mark, so we always promise people that they can go at the hour, but then we do open and wild mic. So Vanessa, you're first on open and wild mic, but on behalf of the Centre for Optimism, Lynn, Angus, Jeremy, Maddie, you've again filled me full of joy. And Maddie, can I throw to you to thank our panellists, and then I'll throw open the conversation to everyone.
Thank you, Victor. And thanks again to Victor and the Centre for Optimism for partnering with ideaSpies. Lynn and I have loved our strategic partnership this year to get all those amazing ideas and innovations out there. And thank you so much to our guest panellists. It's been fascinating listening about all what you've had to say today. And thank you for being so open with your time. So thanks again.
Well, thank you. Well, that's the formal end. So Vanessa, you were going to talk, and then I'm going to let all of our attendees in, so into our wild mic. And then if someone needs to leave, feel free to leave. I'll stay on air till about at least 10 to 2.
Thanks for that, Victor. Yeah, I just wanted to add to the developing country and investing in renewables. I have to say I'm not sure of the latest stats, but for years consistently, although we know China's responsible for a lot of emissions and they do still have a lot of coal, they were actually the biggest investors in renewable energy as well. Like they have been really going, full steam ahead with that. And a couple of years ago, I was in America, and we went to a little town outside of Austin, Texas. It was Georgetown, a very Republican little town, and they were on 100% renewable energy. And it was so, again, really heartening just to go, it was nothing to do with ideology. It was purely an economic decision. The mayor, who very Republican, said it's cheaper to do a long-term contract with renewables than it was with gas or whatever they were using there. So yeah, I feel like we're slowly starting to break all those myths around whose responsibility is to take action. I think it is becoming an economic decision.
Vanessa, I think one of the things that always strikes me when I drive in rural Australia, so electorates that are conceived to be extremely conservative, with organisations often to the right of the National Party representing them, and yet every street corner, every shed, every facility has solar power. I mean, the farmers of Australia have certainly adopted renewables.
It makes economic sense, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Jeremy, do you enjoy what was being said about honey?
Yes, indeed. I look, William, if you're supporting people, with their bees and developing beehives around the world, then you're my friend anyway. So look, that's terrific. A quick comment though, Vanessa, I take your point about other countries doing interesting things. And look, I was inspired a lot by what Grant is saying about what's happening in Australia, but other simple technologies. I've heard a lot about micro hydroelectricity up in Malaysia and the Philippines, where even just a village with a waterfall can have a little machine that actually powers the village. And all this is so simple. And I think what's happening with renewables, it's also bringing the control and power of generating energy down to individuals and small communities, which is a terrific change in the way the community is structured. And that inspires me. But what Grant's talking about, the open solar grant, that was a great story.
Yes, I'll just extend that, Jeremy. On this recent podcast series that we've done, we looked at this idea that Australia can lead the world in energy tech. We've got all the right ingredients to be a world leader, so what I did was I went through a number of what I think are some of the leading companies, and all of them had this idea to grow their businesses here in Australia and then export internationally. So I was just finishing on MGA Solar. They're building this big battery that they want to deploy in Germany, in existing German coal-fired plants, where they'll be able to store energy for longer than 6 hours. And then instead of the lithium ion, which can operate in these very, very fine milliseconds, what you need is the longer duration storage, where they heat and cool big metal blocks. And that's another example of us being able to capture a part of the $1 trillion energy transition, which we'll see in the next couple of decades. So there's huge opportunity for us. And it's just about trying to harness them, and for us to recognize that we can be manufacturing. It's high-tech manufacturing. It's not just production line manufacturing. It's high-tech robot manufacturing, and it's fantastic engineering. We've got all that potential to realize.
Can I just quickly, I don't know if I'm the right person to answer. I think certainly someone here, possibly yourself, is better to answer this question, but someone asked a question way early on in the chat about, or maybe it was actually answered by someone by text, but about coal seam gas, gas and coal mines. What was the difference? Because clearly the government is pushing for gas at the moment, which in my opinion is definitely not a solution. And but perhaps, do you want to quickly, do you have much scientific background around that?
Are you addressing that question to me?
Yeah. Sorry.
Sure. So I think the real I think what's come to light in this last few weeks of the government trying to push gas is they've been open about the market not filling that gap, and saying, well, if the market's not going to do it, we'll do it, which isn't the right signal to any market that government will intervene with their own agenda. The challenge for gas is, yes, it'll be a part of the transition, but a small part of the transition. And what'll win out is lower cost wind and solar and other technology at scale. And so to go ahead and build this kind of gas infrastructure at a very late stage in the energy transition, I think has the potential to see a big investment in a white elephant, rather than something that can kind of aid this transition away from coal generation.
Now, I've been told, that's an interesting point in terms of what happens in the future with gas. I've been told that really the reason that the government's saying that is to create a challenge to industry, because they're very concerned about what's going to happen when the Liddell plant closes, and that industry isn't providing enough in terms of energy to compensate for that. And so I don't know the answer, but one of the points we don't want is our energy prices to increase dramatically because a group of energy providers want to restrict energy.
Yes, so
it's a very, hopefully their challenge works and they don't have to build the station.
Well, agreed. But the important thing is we know already, and this is what our platform is trying to do, we're doing this in the market, bringing lower cost wind and solar to households and businesses. So, this is today. and as people start to take up that lower cost and provide a demand for it, it will then build it out. It's a demand and supply challenge. You just see what's going on with offshore wind. Huge amounts of energy can be generated with offshore wind. So I think it's a combination of existing technology that we have, and it's about the ramp rate, where we can get behind the existing technologies rather than move back into an old extraction mentality, which I think this is the big problem, is there's an extraction mentality that we have to, in order to prosper, we have to extract. Well, I don't subscribe to that. I think renewables is not about extraction. It's about harnessing energy that's around us in a smart and cost-effective way. But if you come from an ideological position of extraction, and that's the only worldview, it's very difficult to shift to something and then create a belief that in fact the market will find a way. And I'm a firm believer that the market will find a way, Lynn, whether it's behind the meter in a big steel examples, which we've got, and aluminium smelters and all these other things. That might be a combination of behind the meter and in front of the meter. Obviously, we want to keep the lights on. But you know, I think this is a market-led transition rather than intervention with a particular agenda.
And it should be. I just think that they're challenging industry to invest in renewables, and maybe, hopefully, that works more to make them.
I think the problem is they're not challenging the industry to invest in renewables. They're giving them a very clear signal that gas is what they are choosing, that they've picked a winner, the government. And I think it shows even with Adani, you know, none of the banks wanted to fund Adani, the coal mine, and it was demonstrated that it was not a market opportunity. And that, yes, when the government then goes and steps into an industry that's not, I mean, you saw Mike Cannon-Brookes, who's a billionaire, who's like, give me a signal and I'll invest my money into a market-led solution. But that's not the signal that they're giving. Yeah.
Well, hopefully we get it all. Got the renewables.
We've got Rod beaming in from San Diego. Anything, and then you, Steve, I think, if that's all right. Anything you want to add from the Californian experience, Rod?
Well, one of the curious things I was thinking about was desalinization, how energy dependent that process is, right? So we opened up a couple of years ago a desalination plant here in San Diego. And I think about things like wave energy here on the coast to drive that type of energy consumption. It just seems that the return on that is not eco-friendly. Unless we can find a way to generate the necessary energy naturally through renewables to drive desalinization. So we obviously have some challenges as the Colorado River continues to dry up about our ability for fresh water in Southern California. But that's one that there's got to be solutions using wave energy potentially on the coast, you know, as well as some of the wind energy coming out of Palm Springs and the nearby desert. So those are things.
I wonder if you can pick that up first. In fact, yesterday I was corresponding with a professor in California because they have not built any water infrastructure since the population was half the size it is now. So the notion of using renewables and desal together was written up as a human rights issue. What do you reckon, Tom?
Well, desalination requires lots of energy, and that's the main input. So whether you use dirty energy resources or green ones, everyone, I think that question is has an obvious answer. So renewables used for desalination is very logical. Just from my perspective, wave energy is sort of an even more natural fit because you can you're in the ocean anyway, so you're taking both the energy from the waves and the water from the ocean and turning it into fresh water.
Now, Steve, I think you had a comment.
Yeah, look, I would call you, if I can just group it, call you guys renewable pioneers. But what interests me is Vanessa's point of giving consumers the access to understanding their footprint. You know, how are they affecting their own little environment, and then pushing it back through schools. Because if you guys are pioneers now, there's a program in Victoria called the sustainability program run through schools, Now think of those as the consumers of our future, who will be really versed in this, in what we're talking about now, and they will really, to me, they will turbocharge what you guys are doing. But if you're giving people pure understanding of what their footprint is now, they're getting, they can touch and feel and get some real connection in achievability. I'd just like to see your point.
Was that to me, Stephen?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I certainly feel like that's we're seeing so much interest in our app and that understand and wanting to understand what they're consuming. We definitely have a very big focus on real data, so it's not sort of assumption based, like, oh, do you know, or ride to work. You know, we use their electricity data, their gas data, their water, and their waste. And the same at the school. We'll be adding flights and vehicles as well. But yeah, no, certainly targeting the kids I think is really important. And that was the thing that really inspired me right from the start, because I was like, well, if we can go into the schools and educate them about their resource consumption, sustainability, climate change, they will then go home and actually educate and upskill their parents. And there's actually a lot of research as well. I think some stuff was done in the States where kids were actually more likely to sway their parents' opinion about climate change, especially if they were on the more conservative side. Because I think people get a bit overwhelmed. It's ridiculous. It's still such a controversial topic, but you know, people who don't know much about it, if they're like, well, my kids are telling me this and they learnt this in school, then, you know, maybe it is trustworthy. And then of course we just lean on the whole pester power of children who are fantastic at, you know, guilt tripping their parents into doing good stuff. And yeah, that's exactly our rationale, is like, we'll educate them now. They'll grow up into an adult that is very aware of how to be efficient with their own life, but also that it's a no-brainer to be going for, you know, cleaner options for energy and for everything. So I think that awareness of what we're all consuming is really important. And I think as Australians as well, we have one of the biggest carbon footprints per person in the world. And, you know, even though globally we're quite a small percentage of the overall emissions, the fact that we have one of the biggest carbon footprints, I think, demands attention. Like, we need to understand what our impact is.
Daniel, I think Daniel had something to say. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to add to that, because I think having a better understanding of what are our activities and what our demand actually, what the impacts are, is, I think, a really important aspect in terms of changing individual behavior and sort of building up collective action, not only on like the energy use, but if you think about some of the discussion here has been around water. And one of the key issues around water is that often people don't really know the things that they're eating or the things that they're doing, how much water is actually being used and how sustainable or unsustainable they are. We're not including all of the environmental, social, and health costs of the things that we actually consume in the price that we pay. So, you know, you think about like Palm Springs and you have all these beautiful golf courses. Is that really the best use of water? You know, we're growing really water dependent crops in areas that are extremely arid using irrigation, and that is contributing to the reduction in water flow in the Colorado River, for example. And there are ways that we can, I think, making consumers more aware of what the impact of what they consume would be really helpful in terms of having a pull effect that would signal to producers that consumers do care about these things. I think also measuring those kinds of things help producers who often also care about the environment, but maybe don't have all the information available to act, and can spur sort of a demand for technologies like more water efficient technologies, new varieties of crops that don't need as much water, maybe changing what we grow, where we grow it. And those types of things can have a pretty significant impact, both on climate change from emissions, but more broadly in sort of our environmental and material footprint.
Daniel, I wonder what's going to happen with overseas travel, because flights you know, emit a lot of CO2, and are prices going to increase dramatically when we can fly again, or are they going to find more fuel efficient fuels?
Well, that's a really good question. I wonder if after COVID, if we don't start to realize that some of the international travel that we were doing was actually not necessary, and that may be something that we start to realize. I think the airline industry in particular is one of those that's going to be one of the harder ones to transition to zero emissions in the near future. And maybe it's one where it's focusing around biofuels, where, you know, it's not a net negative technology, but it's one at least that doesn't necessarily add to it. And then as we're doing this as a stepping stone until we can develop the types of electronic technologies that allow us to have airplanes that travel purely on electricity, you know, I suspect at some point in the future we'll get there, but we maybe need to take intermediate steps that help to reduce the impact of what we're doing, even if it doesn't completely bring down that to zero.
If I can just jump in there, the Fight for Planet A TV series on ABC, everyone can catch up on iView, show, you know, really good examples of like just clicking the button, the offset button when you book your flight. It does actually make a difference. It goes into really important projects. They, you know, they go and actually show one of the tree planting projects, but it's definitely a band-aid option, but it's still a better option if you have to fly to take that sort of measure.
Good point. Yeah.
It's interesting. Couple of influences from what we're going through with COVID. One is that the politicians are paying attention to science a little bit more than they have been before. Well, some are, some aren't. The ones that are seem to be having some success. The other interesting experiment is that the banks are getting used to stranded assets in terms of aeroplanes. And if our financial system and the banks can understand how they can deal with stranded assets, then there might be business models for fossil fuels to better transition through to renewables, the way Grant is suggesting, because stranded assets are a big barrier.
The airlines are really moving to low fuel models. I mean, in fact, if we see one of the benefits of COVID has been the early retirement of the 747s. You've got a lot of retirement of fleets. And I think as people come back, it'll be the fuel efficient planes. I mean, for instance, Kiribati has launched an airline. They're using very fuel efficient Embraer planes. So I think we're seeing rapid take up. And then as Daniel said, when I was Commissioner of the Americas, I worked very closely with Peter Beattie. And there was many proposals around biofuels. Most of the crops were more suited to Queensland than Victoria, for instance.
You're absolutely right, Victor, because I've just gone back on ideaSpies and searched biofuel, and Singapore Airlines launched biofuel flights in 2017.
The US Navy flew a F-18 Super Hornet on biofuels in about 2014. It was a Shandy, I think, 75% biofuel, 25% jet fuel. But it's interesting, we always think of the American military, American government as a laggard, but the American military sees climate change as a threat and is moving very rapidly to adopt low emission technology for warfare.
And they have unlimited budgets, which is a big help.
Yeah, American military have been on climate change since the 90s, the 1990s.
Hey, now listen, we've been on air now almost 2 hours, and I reckon we could all stay here and have coffee and tea. And I mean, I'm happy to leave it on, or shall Maddie and Lynn, shall we leave everyone wanting more? Because I think there is a hunger for doing another event like this on climate. I think Angus and Jeremy conceived a great model of optimism and opportunity in climate, and Vanessa and Grant and Tom and and Will, of course, with his international work, it's been inspirational. Siegfried, with all your wonderful interventions in text and the like. I think there's a good hunger for another one of these, maybe in 3 months or so.
Victor, can I leave you?
Sounds great.
In the work we did on industrial energy efficiency, we realized one fundamental thing, that another one of the energy sources is energy efficiency, which gets back to Vanessa's point about the need to actually really seriously consider how do we as Australians reduce our environmental footprint.
A good point to end on. Thank you very much, Angus, and thank you very much, everybody. You're very inspiring.
Thanks
Thank
again,
you all.
everyone.
All the best.
Lovely to see you
Look
all.
Okay, cheers.
Thanks. On you, Maddie. Well done.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Victor.
Thank you.
Maddie.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that collaboration between ideaSpies and the Centre for Optimism. Hope it's inspired you to think about bringing together folk to talk about optimism, opportunity, innovation and solutions to climate change and the other big issues that require us to step up as leaders. We'd love you to get involved with the Centre for Optimism. Our website is centreforoptimism.com, and you can sign up to our mailing list or you can become a financial member, and we'd love to have you involved in what we do for the years to come.